Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of the Map Room. I'm your host, Eric Cunningham, and with us this week, we finally got Jared Stone and Nick Morris back with us at the same time. So we're really glad to have them both back. And this week is a special episode because we're going to be talking about my home state of North Carolina. I'm a lifelong resident of North Carolina. I've been here my entire life. I've lived mostly in the same area of the state my whole life, aside from when I went to college, and I went to college here. So really excited to talk about kind of the basics of North Carolina, which is one of the most competitive states in the country and has historically had some really high-profile races over the years. So right away, normally we talk about with these discussions, we go into the basic political history first. But with North Carolina, there's some stuff I feel needs to really be explained beforehand to give you an idea of what the traditional dynamics in the state are, because a lot of those still go into play. So what we're going to start with first is what's kind of demonstrative of the state as a whole, which is the historic east-west divide in the state. So this is the 2008 gubernatorial election. Bev Perdue narrowly beat Pat McCrory. She beat him by a small margin, and she did so on the strength of the historic divide in North Carolina, where the eastern portion of the state, around the coast, ranging from Raleigh and Durham all the way off to the coast, the Black Belt areas, all of these places have been historically Democratic and buoyed Democrats with historical strength in the region for years. Meanwhile, Pat McCrory, the mayor of Charlotte, almost won Mecklenburg County, even as Barack Obama overwhelmingly won the county, and in fact voted for John Kerry in 2004. In the central portion of the state right around here is where the Republican strength has typically been. And this is a strength that's gone back for decades. People don't realize that North Carolina has actually been, when there have been fair elections, when we finally got past the era of voter suppression and white supremacy, there have been historically competitive and interesting elections here. As that shows, we've had historically competitive elections based along that east-west divide in North Carolina, and this is traced back for decades. I want to show one election I find particularly demonstrative of this, besides that gubernatorial election, which is the other way around, which is the 1928 presidential election. In 1928, Herbert Hoover won an overwhelming majority of the vote, and he actually made inroads into several southern states, including North Carolina, which he won by around 10% of the vote, a really impressive margin for a Republican in North Carolina. And so if you look at this map right here, this kind of gives you, if you look at North Carolina over in the corner, you see a lot of that ancestral Democratic strength still over there, specifically ranging from the Black Belt areas, all these places in the eastern portion of the state, whereas the western portion, and particularly this region right around here, where those dark red counties are, that's called the Piedmont. It's the region of the state I am from, and it's the region that has the most ancestrally Republican support. Republicans have historically done fairly well in this region, and it's one of the areas that is going to be really important in 2020 because the Democratic candidate for Senate, Cal Cunningham, is actually from the Piedmont. He's from Lexington, North Carolina, which is a well-known city in western North Carolina. It's actually the birthplace of what we call Lexington-style barbecue or western North Carolina-style barbecue. It's kind of a dividing line between east and west. So one thing I want to kind of go over is the regions of North Carolina. So typically, when we talk about North Carolina, there are a few regions. There's the western portion of the state, which is probably these regions up through here, these 5 regions right here. You have the central portion of the state, which consists of mainly the Charlotte area and Greensboro, Winston-Salem. Those are kind of the central area. And then everything else is kind of grouped in broadly with the east. One thing to note with North Carolina is its political and geographic diversity. There are pockets of Republican and Democratic strength all throughout the state. No one area of the state is a single booster for Democrats or Republicans, where if they do well enough in that area, they'll win the state. You actually need to have a broad coalition to win, and that relies on winning these various regions. So a few of them I find really interesting here that I want to talk about are the western portions of the state, specifically the Asheville area, is one of the most competitive in the state. And this is primarily because of the city of Asheville, located in Buncombe County. Asheville is a blue county, a very blue county, in a sea of red. All these other regions around here are overwhelmingly Republican and vote for Republican by broad margins. But because of the strength of Asheville, Donald Trump only won this area right here by around 3,000 votes, compared to, for example, the High Country, which consists of some of the most ancestrally Republican counties in the state. Avery and Mitchell literally have been Republican since the Civil War, voted for him with 65% of the vote. The Unifor region, which consists of these 4 counties right here, where I'm from, gave Trump nearly 70% of the vote. And so that's kind of the bastion of Democratic strength out in the West. Another area that's of importance is Metrolina, or the Charlotte metropolitan area. And you'll notice, again, it's politically divided. It gave Trump around a 3 percentage point victory. This is because while Charlotte is overwhelmingly Democratic, and Mecklenburg County at this point as well, these other counties all around it are overwhelmingly Republican. So if I were to take away Mecklenburg County from this Metrolina district, you'll notice that it keeps around half its population. Around half of the population of that area, over 2 million people, are based in that area. And about half of them live in Charlotte and half in the suburbs. The counties surrounding Charlotte voted for Donald Trump with around 65% of the vote, whereas Charlotte itself voted for Hillary Clinton with around 62% of the vote. So even though the region as a whole is politically competitive, regionally, there's basis of Republican and demographic strength. Another really competitive region is the Triad. If you've paid attention to the news over the last week, you'll have heard about this earthquake that occurred in North Carolina along the Virginia border. And that's where this happened, in the Triad region. And this region as a whole leans Republican by around 10 percentage points, because these counties around through here are some of the most Republicans in the state, particularly Randolph and Davidson counties, typically give Republicans anywhere from 65 to 70% of the vote. But these counties right here, Forsyth County, which contains Winston-Salem, and Guilford County, which contains Greensboro, are very Democratic. Finally, what I want to talk about real quick is 2 other regions. The Research Triangle area consists of Chapel Hill, which is in Orange County, and Durham, which is in Durham County, as well as a few other counties surrounding it. This is the Democratic real base of strength in the state, if you want to think about it that way. Hillary Clinton won about 69% of the vote in these counties. And so this is really there's lots of universities here. There's lots of racial diversity, specifically in Durham County. And this is really the base of strength for liberal support in the state. This is the area, aside from Asheville, where Bernie Sanders did the best in his elections. So Democrats really want to drive out the vote in this area. But even as you notice here, that's only around 617,000 people in a state with over 10 million people. Even if they get 80% of the vote in this area, that's not enough to carry an election. One other area I want to talk about real quick before I move on is the Sandhills region. And this area voted for Donald Trump by around 4,000 votes. So on paper, politically competitive region. But if you go back as recently as 2008, it voted for Barack Obama with around 53% of the vote, actually much better than his statewide margin. This area is politically competitive and politically diverse. Its population consists of not only black voters and white voters, but also a large Lumbee Indian population, who are one of the largest Native American tribes in the country, but lack federal recognition. And their vote in particular, as we'll explain later, has been really key to the shifting of the vote in this region as a whole. But those are kind of the rough regional guides of the state. So I could go over a few other regions. For example, the Black Belt, which is, as the name suggests, it's the most heavily African-American portion of the state. The Outer Banks, which has a growing military population based in Elizabeth City, as well as diverse resort towns in the Outer Banks. And then the Wilmington area, which has one of the most rapidly growing cities in the state in Wilmington, but also has rapidly growing and affluent resort communities surrounding it, particularly in Brunswick County, which is the most rapidly growing county in the state. So that kind of gives you an idea of what I'm talking about here with if you take anything out of this discussion of North Carolina, it's that you can't just rely on one area of the state if you're a Republican or a Democrat. There's a lot of political and geographic diversity here, and that can really be shown in particular by one map, which is the population map in the state of North Carolina. This is the map of North Carolina in terms of population per square mile as of the 2010 census. This has grown since then. You'll notice that much of the East and the West in particular are relatively undeveloped to this day. The Outer Banks has relatively high population density. You have some coastal cities that have a large population, and of course you have the major counties. But there's not an overwhelming dominating metropolitan area like in the state of Georgia that we talked about in our very first episode that really influences the state. Where I live, which is in Catawba County, I'm within an hour and a half of driving to any of a number of major cities. Asheville, Charlotte, Winston-Salem, Greensboro. It would even only take me, a couple of hours, maybe 3 hours to get to Chapel Hill. So really, there's a lot of cities, a lot of larger and mid-sized cities that, and metropolitan areas in general, that both parties have to compete in. There's a large number of medium markets that are politically important, and so that makes it a very expensive state to run in. You need to not only be running ads, for example, in Charlotte and in Raleigh, but also in the Piedmont Triad, in Wilmington, in Asheville. There's a lot of areas that you really have to pay attention to when you're running in the state of North Carolina. So I'm going to throw it off to Nick here, who is going to go kind of more into depth in some of these demographic and political trends that I was explaining earlier.
Looking at some recent elections, such as in 2002 and 2004, where George Bush won the state by quite large margins, it suddenly shifted to a swing state as the decade came to a close, when Barack Obama won it by a very narrow margin. Now, this is mainly because of growth in the urban and suburban areas, mainly in Charlotte. If you look at population growth within Charlotte, you can see it's at about 20%. If you compare it to other areas of the country, this is quite high growth. Even when you compare it to the state as a whole, which has grown by about 10%, this is still very high. So this is where most of that growth is coming from. And despite the state growing at a rapid rate, you've also got areas which are declining in population, such as in the Black Belt, also in the Sandhills. If you look at an area such as the Sandhills, these have consisted of traditionally Democratic counties, but then you look at 2016, most of these counties flipped from Obama to Trump. And yeah, that's because of this population growth. You have very low population growth in some of these counties. In the whole region, it's around 3%, and in some counties the population is actually declining, such as in Robeson County and others, as you can see on this map. And this is where Trump's main advantage has come from. Hillary Clinton managed to run up the score in places such as Mecklenburg County. The southeastern part of Mecklenburg County has actually grown a huge amount. That is part of what's driven districts such as North Carolina's 9th district, which had a special election in 2019 to be competitive, but it has also been balanced out by some of those areas which are declining in population, which has caused the area to go more Republican.
Yep. So as Nick has explained, one thing that's really important in North Carolina is looking at the population growth and the changes in some of these areas. Robeson County in particular is a really important county to look at because it's one of the most rapidly shifting in the country. It was actually the most diverse county in the country to have voted for Donald Trump. The non-Hispanic white population is around 30 to 33% of the population, with the remaining population mainly being split between African Americans and the Lumbee Indian tribe, who have been become an increasingly competitive group over the years. This is in part because Republicans and Democrats both agree largely on Lumbee rights in particular, which is that the Lumbee deserve federal recognition. In elections like the 2018 House race and the 2019 special in North Carolina's 9th district, Republicans actually did fairly well with the Lumbee, but it really traces back to 2016. So this first map of Robeson County kind of really explains the trend we've seen here. So in 2012, Barack Obama won Robeson County with around 58% of the vote. This map is courtesy of J. Miles Coleman, who is the premier person to follow on Twitter when it comes to Robeson County. Maybe politics in general, but specifically Robeson County is his pet project. He knows more about this county than probably a ton of people, so it's really worth giving him a follow on this. But you'll notice that in 2016, Donald Trump won the county by around 4 percentage points. This is a massive, massive shift, and it occurred throughout the county. At the same time, in 2018, Dan McCready managed to get some of that Obama margin back and won the county over Mark Harris, who was scandal-plagued then and in the future over this issue. But when it came to the 2019 election, both of these races were equally close. Dan McCready actually lost a lot of his vote share to Dan Bishop, the Republican. Although Dan Bishop is from Charlotte, he actually made Lumbee rights a major portion of his campaign, promised to aggressively support recognition of the Lumbee tribe, and ran a basically very friendly campaign that really changed a lot of votes. And you'll notice basically everywhere in the county shifted to vote for Dan Bishop more in 2019, even though Dan McCready still won the county by a narrow margin. So that's kind of a ground zero for some of the basic political trends in the state in that area. But there's a few other areas to pay attention to as well. So another place we're looking at in North Carolina for some of these rapidly shifting trends in a state that's remained relatively stable politically is the is the 8th District, which is a new congressional district that was drawn following the redraw, and it's the most politically competitive in the state now. It would have voted for Republicans in the gubernatorial and presidential elections in 2016 by under 10% of the vote. So that's kind of what passes as competitive right now. But this is because mainly of two counties. So in the eastern portion of the congressional district, you have Cumberland County, which is a majority minority county. A lot of it African-American population based out of the city of Fayetteville. While a lot of Republican support draws from the rural areas and from the Fort Bragg area, which is one of the largest military bases in the country. And so that county is kind of a Democratic bulwark here that makes the district more competitive than usual. But that's not the county we're paying attention to. The county we're paying attention to is in the western portion of the congressional district, and it's called Cabarrus County. It's home to the city of Concord, which is one of the most rapidly growing in the state. It's predominantly suburban Charlotte, and it's remained Republican to a strong degree, but it's been trending more Democratic in recent years. Our friend Ethan Shen on Twitter has particularly been of major focus on the 8th Congressional District as a competitive district in 2020. And it's definitely worth considering the possibility of that because of those competing trends. One other area that Democrats have historically been competitive in the state is the western portion. And there's actually a large number of ticket splitting in the western portion of the state. As some of those early maps I had showed, Democrats historically did fairly well around the Asheville area and some of the more rural areas surrounding it. Now, the 11th Congressional District has also been redrawn, and in 2016, it would have voted for Donald Trump by around 17 percentage points. So a pretty strong win for him, with the only real basis of Democratic strength being in Asheville, which is one of those politically liberal cities in probably the southeast, and then in Jackson County, which is still Republican, but has a large college, Western Carolina University, which has become more Democratic in recent years, even though the county has become more Republican from 2008. You'll notice, however, in the gubernatorial race that Roy Cooper narrowed this to only a 6-point loss. It's worth noting that this is pretty unique to Roy Cooper at the moment. The congressional district race we do not have listed as competitive. The Republican nominee, Madison Cawthorn, remains the prohibitive and overwhelming favorite in this district, but it would be remiss to not point out that this region has historically been politically competitive for Democrats. One other race I kind of want to show real quick that kind of highlights what we're talking about here is the presidential vote swings. There's two maps I want to show for this. So this is from 2000 to 2016. Now, obviously, this is a little bit of an unfair comparison in some ways because 2000 was an overwhelming win for George Bush, while 2016 was a narrow win for Donald Trump. But this does give you an idea of how areas have shifted. Now, keep in mind, this is not how these areas have voted. For example, counties like Henderson and Transylvania and Union remain overwhelmingly Republican broadly, but they have shifted towards the Democratic column from 2000. Whereas you'll notice a lot of these eastern portions of the state that used to be Democratic strongholds have shifted to become more Republican. In particular, Columbus County, which actually was won by Al Gore, is now one of the most Republican counties in that portion of the state. Robeson County, several of these other counties towards the Outer Banks, like Currituck County, Camden County, Pasco County is actually looking to be one of the bellwether counties in 2020. It was a narrow win for Hillary Clinton, fairly similar to her national vote margin. But on the other hand, you'll notice Democrats have actually done better in most of the urban and suburban areas. So, for example, massive vote shift in Mecklenburg County, which used to lean Republican as a whole, is now a very strong Democratic stronghold. The Piedmont area as a whole, Forsyth and Guilford counties, very Democratic counties now. Durham, Orange, and Wake have also all become more Democratic than they already were. And then finally, several counties out in the east, like Wilson and Pitt, have mid-sized to large cities in them, which have made them more competitive. For example, Pitt has the city of Greenville and is also a college. It's home of Eastern Carolina University. So Democrats have a reliable source of strength there. A few other ones to mention would be Watauga County, which is becoming a Democratic-leaning county. It's home to Appalachian State University, which is my alma mater, and is actually a very large university that's rapidly growing, and it's kind of overwhelming the more traditionally Republican areas surrounding it. So I hope that gives you kind of a basic overview of the political trends we're talking about here. So real quick, before we go into these congressional districts, which are kind of really important and kind of key to understanding North Carolina in general is the history of the congressional districts, I want to show what the most recent presidential election looked like. And we're going to, again, use Wikipedia's maps here because the map is very good. So the current presidential map of North Carolina looks something like this. You have Democratic strength in the east, in the west, in the form of Watauga County and Buncombe, which are Democratic leaning. Mecklenburg County is very Democratic. Orange and Durham are very Democratic. And then you have a bunch of major urban counties like Guilford, Forsyth, Wake County, Cumberland, and Greene counties, which are Democratic leaning, but not overwhelmingly Democratic. They're not. These are actually counties that Republicans can and have won in statewide elections. So even though, as you can see with those maps, it has a pretty stable political map as a whole, there's actually a lot of ticket splitting, which you can kind of see in some of these other maps. In particular, I want to show two elections that are of importance, which are the Secretary of State race and the Commissioner of Labor race. So the Commissioner of Labor race in 2016 was an overwhelming Republican victory. They won the race by around 10 percentage points. Incumbent Sherry Berry is kind of a meme. She's actually the only statewide officer from my county, and she does very well in urban areas. Part of the reason she does so well is that her name is actually in every single elevator in the state, a name in her picture, which has actually been proven by a friend of mine, Jacob Smith, who wrote a political science piece about this. But you'll notice that these counties around here have become less Democratic. In fact, Republicans actually win Forsyth County, Watauga, and a few other areas surrounding it, even though they lose counties like Robeson, which voted Republican at the presidential level. So that's kind of the maximum Republican win at this point. The maximum Democratic win looks something like Elaine Marshall's map. So Elaine Marshall is the Democratic Secretary of State. She was elected first in 1996 when she defeated Richard Petty, the famous stock car racing driver for NASCAR, who ran a political campaign to try and defeat her, but he was ultimately unable to do so, in part because of that residual Democratic strength. So this is another map from J. Miles Coleman, but this is kind of the maximum Democratic win in North Carolina, which is, again, around 5 to 10 percentage points. And you'll notice here, not only does she win a lot of those counties that swung towards Democrats, or that swung towards Republicans in 2016, like Robeson, Bladen, Columbus, even some of the counties out in the east, like Wayne County. She actually did very well in some of these rural areas as well. So even though that map I showed you earlier of the presidential election, with a few exceptions, has pretty much been the case for the last decade or so, there's been a lot of vote shifting under the surface that has enabled the state to remain politically competitive, even though the state as a whole has been considered to be trending Democratic. So I'm going to throw it off to Jared Stone here, who's kind of going to go over another important aspect in North Carolina, which are the congressional districts. There's a history of gerrymandering in North Carolina that goes back for decades, actually, even before Republicans took office in 2010 and drew their map. And so Jared's going to kind of go over the history of North Carolina in that regard.
Yeah, so congressional redistricting and gerrymandering has been pretty consistent throughout the recent history of North Carolina politics. And this is because even though Democrats held political power throughout the state, as they did in most other southern states for a majority of the 19th and the 20th centuries, as the state began to become more competitive, you started to see concerted efforts by both sides to try to drown out their opposition and to try to ensure success on the congressional level. So I'm going to share my screen right now just to show you what some of those maps look like and some of the controversies that were behind those. So if you can see my screen right now, what I have up is the North Carolina congressional map from 1993 to 1998. Now, if you have studied the history of congressional gerrymandering and packing and cracking, then you might know this map, because this was a map that essentially inspired the landmark Supreme Court decision in the court case Shaw v. Reno. Now, this court case is really about the extent to which racial and partisan gerrymandering are appropriate. The reason why they're used oftentimes is to try to dilute minority turnout and minority voices from Congress, and they're often used by Republicans in the state legislature and on the statewide level to try to pack and to shore up Democratic support in those types of areas and allow them to therefore draw out more Republican districts to help them gain more representation in Congress. So if you look at this congressional map that was drawn to favor Democrats in the state, to give them essentially 2-to-1 representation over Republicans, you can see a few things. Back when Republicans had a lot of support in the Charlotte area, especially in the suburbs surrounding the city, and in the wedge right here, which is basically the southeastern part of Mecklenburg County, you can see that Democrats wanted to draw a district that was able to ensure Democratic support and representation. And so this monstrosity of a district that stretches from the inner city of Charlotte, basically up the state, and collecting the cities of Winston-Salem and Greensboro, that was drawn to basically ensure Democratic representation. And so what the Supreme Court case really found was that the district was unfair because it essentially packed all these minority groups, especially African Americans in the cities, into a single district. The Supreme Court case is really about striking a balance, striking a chord, where minorities were able to have representation in Congress without being entirely confined within a single district. Essentially, they wanted to make sure that they would be spread out just enough to ensure representation in Congress, make sure they had an ample voice there. And so this district that was drawn to collect their vote really did not help out with that effort. And I'm going to pull up a DRA map right here. This is sort of a simulation. It's not exactly like the map, but it's basically a modern version that's based on current population that is meant to once again shore up minority voters in these very democratic areas. And if I turn to the demographics, if you see this district right here, which is essentially made to mimic, for the most part, the district that we saw over there, if you look at the colors, you can see that where there's blue, which means African Americans live there, you can see how much it overlaps with this district. And so just to show you again, look at this blue district right here. And if we go and look at the colors, you can see how it overlaps with a lot of these minority areas in the cities like Winston-Salem, Greensboro, and Charlotte and Mecklenburg County. Now to move on to some of the other drawings. Now, as you may know, this map was essentially struck down as an exemplar of racial gerrymandering, and so it had to be redrawn. And so in recent history, there's been quite a consistent trend of having to redraw the North Carolina maps because they do favor sometimes one party over the other to a very unfair extent. There are two other redrawings that were between the one I just showed you and then the 2003 one, but they're just not as interesting to show, and so that's why we don't have them on here. So to show you the next one, this is the map that was used basically between 2003 and 2010. And you can still see here that there is essentially this corridor that connects the majority African American areas of Charlotte to those of Winston-Salem and Greensboro. What you can also see is in the eastern area, basically as coalitions were beginning to shift, they were not exactly where they are right now, but as Eric mentioned earlier, this area, namely Eastern North Carolina, used to be basically the stronghold of Democratic support within the state. And even within the last decade, there were some minor shifts. But to show you some of the areas that are specifically highlighted, you can see this district right here that extends from Durham, which is part of the Research Triangle. Durham is home to Duke University, therefore very liberal. You can see it extends also slightly into Orange County over here with Chapel Hill, and then it swoops down into Wake County with Raleigh. And even back then, even when this was drawn, Wake County was not an entirely Democratic county. It wasn't yet one that could be basically counted on for Democrats. This is a county that did vote for George Bush in his various campaigns before it did turn to the Democrats with an Obama victory. And so what you can see here, and this is a commonality with the next few maps also, is that Democrats really, to get representation, to get their votes, they had to essentially carve out the city of Raleigh and some of the immediate surrounding areas, which were the most Democratic areas of Wake County, while leaving the other ones basically to their own separate congressional district. And then you look over here in the northeastern area. To this day, this remains essentially the Black Belt area. It's quite rural, and it's ancestrally Democratic just because it has a large population of rural African Americans. And to this day, the modern version of this district that basically extends into these areas is majority African American, and it's represented by G.K. Butterfield, who is also African American. And so it's made to essentially act as a Voting Rights Act district and to represent those areas. You can think of this as sort of similar to other VRA districts in the South, such as the second in Georgia, represented by Sanford Bishop, which takes in the southwestern African American areas. And then you can go down to places like Wilmington. You can see an arm that stretches out into some of the more urban areas, but really just a way to sort of divide these areas. And what you can really see here is the fact that Republican and Democratic support are not entirely concentrated within single areas. And that's why the maps look so wonky sometimes, and why they have to extend into very weird areas. Now, to go over to the next one, this is the map from 2013 to 2016 that I want to show you for a few reasons. Now, back in 2013, you saw some things that even today are pretty unknown and are pretty wild to even think about. One thing I want to show you right here is essentially this 9th district right here. The 9th district was made to encompass the Charlotte suburbs, the immediate suburbs in Mecklenburg County, and just to extend a little bit out to gain some more population. And this district was represented by Sue Myrick. Sue Myrick is actually the mother of the current lieutenant governor, who's Dan Forest, and she's a Republican. And she was able to win this district quite comfortably in her various election campaigns, because this basically holds the most ancestral Republican areas of Charlotte and Mecklenburg County, namely this wedge right here. And if you can see, it kind of looks like a bit like a wedge, like the Nike swoosh. And that's essentially why it's called the wedge. It takes in some of the wealthy suburbs that are just south of Charlotte. And you can see here that also extends a little bit into Union County. Union County is a suburban/exurban county that is just southeast of Mecklenburg County. And even though it has shifted left in recent years, it is still on the federal level very strongly Republican. And even on the state level, it sends many Republicans to the state legislature. Now, something I want to show you also is looking out west into the Piedmont area, into the foothills. The foothills remain strongly Republican. This is true to this day. But you can see here that the city of Asheville in Buncombe County, because it is so Democratic, was actually carved. And it was actually meant to be taken into this district, which encompasses areas west of Charlotte. And this district was already very Republican. And so to make this 11th district right over here more Republican, it basically decided to carve out and eat out the Democratic bastion of Asheville, which could help Republicans with the representation. Now we have 2 more maps to show you that I'll show you quite quickly. This is the one that we're dealing with to this day. It's not going to be the map come 2021, but this is the one that we currently have today. This was also ruled unconstitutional, and it warranted a redrawing that's going to take place essentially after this next election and into next year. You can see here that there is more attention directed towards the individual communities, into the communities that have more similar characteristics. You can see the 12th district right here, represented by Alma Adams, has a very strong African-American population and takes in much of urban Charlotte and some of the immediate suburbs just around here. It no longer stretches into the other African-American cities. It's more consolidated now. You can see here in the research triangle, there are basically 3 Democratic districts, or 2 rather, that are here. The 4th district is represented by David Price, very strongly Democratic. And you can see from here, as I talked about before, how it had to eat out of Raleigh in Wake County to retain its Democratic status. And then the 1st here, represented once again by G.K. Butterfield, encapsulates and encompasses those ancestrally Democratic African-American areas. And now there are a few districts here that actually have been amended into the next redrawing. For example, the 2nd district right here, represented by George Holding, takes in these areas of Wake County that are historically Republican, but have trended Democratic recently. Even going into areas like Apex and Cary, which are in Wake County, those are traditionally Republican, but are some of the fastest growing cities in North Carolina. And so they've trended very Democratic recently. Another interesting county of note is Nash County right here. Nash County is an exurban county. It's home to the current governor, Roy Cooper. And it's been a county that's also been somewhat trending to the Democratic direction. It's still pretty competitive, but you can see there's some major population growth going on in these areas that is causing some of these counties like Nash to trend in the Democratic direction. Then going over here to the 13th and the 6th district, these are districts that are meant to slice essentially Greensboro right over here, which is, as I mentioned, a very Democratic city. And so these districts are able to slice it and retain their highly Republican status. The 13th is represented by Ted Budd. The 6th represented by Mark Walker. And Mark Walker and George Holding are both essentially going to be drawn out in the next redrawing. And this is because this current map was ruled as unconstitutional. So now I'm going to go to the final map, which is going to be the map that's going to be in place after the 2020 elections coming into 2021. And it's a much more fair map. There are a few reasons why. You can see here in the west that Buncombe County is not split up. Asheville remains the center of the 11th district. It was represented by Mark Meadows, but it's now going to be represented by Madison Cawthorn. And so this district is going to become slightly more competitive, even though it should be still basically a lock for Madison Cawthorn, who's going to be the next Republican representative likely for this district. The 6th here takes in Winston-Salem and Greensboro. Mark Walker has essentially been drawn out, even though Ted Budd's district did overlap with some of these areas. But this district is going to gain a new Democratic representative, most likely. And finally, the 2nd district right over here is likely going to be represented by Deborah Ross, who actually ran against Richard Burr in the Senate election in 2016. And so George Holding is a little bit out of luck. One thing I just wanted to go over kind of quickly is this 8th district right here. We were talking about this a little bit earlier, but it's a district that could potentially become quite competitive in 2020. And just to quickly show you why, it's that there are a lot of state legislative districts that are also overlapping the 8th that are also going to be competitive in November. And if you look right here, this is the state legislative ratings from C-Analysis. It does a very good job in depicting and prognosticating state legislative elections. And so I highly recommend you go visit it. But you can see a lot of these areas that overlap the 8th are going to be competitive come 2020 and come the next election, including, as Eric was mentioning, the fast-growing city of Concord right here. These two districts are going to be competitive. And then going into Fayetteville, you can see some competitive districts right here. And so the 8th is definitely another one of those districts to really keep an eye on.
So Jared did a really good job of explaining those congressional districts. I do want to explain a few more things in regards to this map that are a little bit unorthodox. So the new map that Essie explained, it's more fair. The previous maps were 10-3 Republican gerrymanders. Republicans had 10 seats, Democrats had 3. This new map is an 8-5 map, and it's a bipartisan compromise. In North Carolina, the governor cannot veto maps. So even though the governor, Roy Cooper, is a Democrat, Republicans had majorities and were able to draw these maps ultimately, and they had them signed off on by the Democratic Party and by other ones who basically just agreed to kind of stop the legislative fighting until the next cycle. So I like to refer to the 8th and the 9th districts as actually the Thanos districts, because they're in ways they're perfectly balanced, right? So the 9th district is very politically competitive because there's been that growing Democratic strength in the Mecklenburg area and in some parts of Union County. But this is entirely counterbalanced by the Republican strength that's been growing in the East. So the end result is, even though there's a lot of change underneath the vote there, the district is relatively stable in terms of how it votes. And we have the district rated, I believe, that's safe Republican at elections daily. The 13th district is another interesting one here. Ted Budd got lucky because Ted Budd, unlike Mark Walker, who lives in Greensboro, Ted Budd lives in Davie County, which is absurdly Republican. So while Mark Walker got drawn out because he lives in the center of Greensboro, and really there's no way to draw a competitive district in Greensboro, so he got drawn out, and Ted Budd, who was younger, got lucky. Two other things here is that the first district is not as diverse or not as Democratic as it was before because it lost the city of Durham. So at the moment, it actually becomes, like Jared said, more like Georgia's 2nd congressional district. In fact, it's no longer even majority minority. It's actually a majority white district that simply has enough black voters to keep G.K. Butterfield in office. Some counties like Nash and Wayne and Gates are increasingly Republican areas, even though Nash is trending Democratic in many ways. Finally, the most unorthodox division of the map is the 5th and the 10th districts. So the 10th goes from Catawba County, which is where I'm from, to Lincoln and Iredell, and then to some areas around Winston-Salem. The 5th district stretches across the mountains into Gaston County. These two districts are roughly the same in terms of how they vote, and there's really no reason they couldn't have drawn the 5th district to just include all of these counties, and then the 10th district to contain most of the areas along the Virginia border. I can only assume it's because of discussions they had with the candidates over what they would prefer. In fact, historically, the representative for the 10th district, Patrick McHenry, who has been in Republican leadership and is considered to be a potential candidate for speaker at some point, was originally from Gaston County, from Cherville. He actually moved to Lincoln County, so he's able to be drawn into this 10th district right here, while the 5th district, which is represented by Virginia Fox, who lives in Watauga County, was drawn to incorporate her the other way. One other thing with the C analysis map I wanted to mention is one reason the Republicans have been doing so poorly in Cabarrus County is because of candidate quality. And I really want to focus in on one Republican here, who is Larry Pittman. Larry Pittman has been known for his controversial comments. He has commented that North Carolina should oppose the decision by the Supreme Court allowing same-sex marriage. He has compared Lincoln to Hitler, which is less than ideal, especially in North Carolina, which had substantial pockets of Republican strength that goes back to the Civil War and to the Reconstruction. He's been commented about climate change, and he's called for the summary execution of protesters as a result of the protests amounting from the shooting, the police death of George Floyd. And so his district right here, which consists of a large part of Concord, is politically competitive, even though on a whole it really shouldn't be that competitive. The other district here, the 82nd, has some of the more Democratic areas of Kannapolis and Concord, so it's much more competitive. Whereas the final area in the county, which consists of the most rural eastern portion of the county, as well as some other areas and some other counties around it like Stanley and like Alamance, is uncontested Republican. So finally, before we close off, we want to kind of give you the prospects that North Carolina has for the 2020 elections. So I feel it's kind of useful in this case to show you the presidential swing map for the most recent elections, the counties you want to keep an eye on. So this is the swing from 2008 to 2016. So you'll notice that most of the counties in the state have actually trended Republican to a small degree since 2008, including most of these counties out in the east, including the Black Belt counties, while most of the large urban counties have trended Democratic to a degree. So for a Democrat to win in North Carolina, they really need to do three things. One is they need to try to keep as many Democratic voters in the eastern portion of the state as possible. Ideally, they win all the counties that traditionally win in this area, and then they hopefully win places like Nash County and Lenoir County, which Lenoir is actually one of the closest counties in the country. One other county to keep an eye on is county labeled number 10 here. Pasco County was a very, very competitive county in 2016 that narrowly voted for Hillary Clinton over Donald Trump. This will be one to kind of keep an eye on to show you that political trend. The second thing they need to do is they need to try to draw a lot of the votes out from these urban vote sinks like Asheville, Mecklenburg, Wake, Greensboro, and then Chapel Hill and Durham. That's kind of the base of Democratic strength, and if they want to win in North Carolina, they'll need to continue not only improving their margins in Wake County, but also turning out voters. Finally, they need to hopefully, if they want to win, convince some of these suburban voters to switch parties. So people in counties like Cabarrus and Union counties in particular are ones they're going to go after because these counties have large suburban growth from Charlotte. And so that's going to be really important for them to kind of keep some of those voters who voted for down ballot candidates in 2018 to have them vote for president or for congressional candidates in 2020. They're going to want to do that. For Republicans, the strategy is the exact opposite. Republicans will want to be turning out the vote in the eastern portion of the state, flipping some of those counties like Robeson, Bladen, Columbus, Richmond, and increasing their margins there, but also increasing the margins in counties like Sampson and Duplin counties, and Wayne County, which have substantial African American populations, but don't have the racially polarized voting patterns that you get in places like Georgia. Republicans can actually stand to gain a large number of votes from these sorts of areas, from traditionally Democratic voters. The second is they want to increase their turnout in the West. So obviously, counties like Watauga are going to be a hard sell, but they've actually been increasing their votes substantially in the far western portions of the state, even in counties like Jackson County, which is a college county. They'll want to increase their vote shares here and hopefully have that drive them forward. Finally, they want to not only keep these suburban voters that they typically get from places like Union and Cabarrus, but also turnout voters all across the Piedmont of the state, which generally, depending on how you look at it, can range anywhere from Catawba to Randolph counties. This is the traditional Republican bastion of the state. Republican candidates typically get anywhere from 60 to 70% of the vote, even 80% in some occasions in these counties. And they're not small rural areas either. Counties like Catawba have over 100,000 people, and Davidson has the large city of Lexington. Rowan County, another one, has a large county city of Salisbury. So these are all areas Republicans can increase their turnout and increase their margins that they got from these counties in 2020. This diversity across North Carolina is what makes it so competitive, and why the foreseeable future, the idea of a permanently Democratic majority in North Carolina is much less achievable here than in a place like Georgia, because there's not that one dominant area in North Carolina. Both sides have to kind of rely on campaigning across the entire state. You can't really leave out any particular region. And so with that, we'll conclude this episode of the Map Room. Thank you for watching. Where can we find you on social media, Jared and Nick?
You can find me on Twitter at JStonePolitics.
You can find me on Twitter at Tossup Report.
And you can find me on Twitter at DE Cunningham too. You can also find all of our writings on Elections Daily. I've written about North Carolina extensively at Elections Daily, including hypothetical maps and past elections, like the 1996 election between Richard Petty and Elaine Marshall. You can find us at elections_daily on Twitter and elections-daily.com. So thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on next week's edition of the Map Room.